it's a total honor for me to start by introducing you Virginia Goldner, who was my supervisor years back, but just reminded me that her first supervisor was also Salvador Minuchin, but it was Salvador Minuchin pre-feminist Sal. He was Sal before Enlightenment. And that I began to attend his supervision sessions when he was in his next phase of development. Virginia is an academic, a feminist scholar, a psychoanalyst, an exquisite writer, and a couples therapist. I know Virginia from years back, basically when I read her writings about domestic violence in the 90s. And at the time, this piece, Behind the Batterer is a Wounded Boy, was a completely new concept. Of course, every concept that becomes a normal thing, you don't remember, you kind of, now it's obvious. And then, but you remember the first time you read it and it was like, whoa. So the latest piece that I read by Virginia was an article that she wrote about sexual harassment. And I thought we have done a very nice first part of the day, emphasizing the empathy side toward men. And now we're going to also have, in this conversation, the side of us that challenges some of the behaviors of the men. Because remember, as we started with Minuchin, it's a both and. So, Virginia.
Thank you, Esther. So can you hear me well enough, or okay?
No.
No. All right. I may have to hold it then if it's stuck here. Is that better or not? Completely fine. All right. All right.
This way you don't have to lean.
Oh, yeah, okay, good. Right.
Any pocket you want.
Yeah, okay. Just put it here. Again, testing the elegance of Esther's organization in the personal and the organizational. Okay, so I'm going to depart from more or less the convention of today a little bit, do something a little more conventional, but I hope not dull, which is read. Not word for word, but I have so many ideas that I've sort of worked on and I'm attached to that if I talk a cappella, I'm going to lose some of them. So I'm going to read this text and hope you'll find it worthy. So, every time it seems as if we have exhausted our supply of top-tier sexual harassers, another one bites the dust. I'm not even going to try to keep up with that tally. No one, except those paid to do it, in fact, can keep track of those accused. But while the tawdry facts of these cases have started to blur, I think all of us remember, here we go, a shaken Al Franken. We could move to that. Is he there? Let's wait till you are reminded of what I'm about to talk about. Yeah, if that could be enlarged and we can all look at him. Yeah. Resigning his senatorial seat over this highly damaging photo. Now, Franken is now seen by many to be an early casualty of the Me Too reckoning. His snarky affability, which could be guaranteed to nail even the best prepared witnesses he interrogated as a senator, I think we could all agree is a true public loss wherever you come out on the issue of his conduct. But I'd like to revisit that photo that we're looking at, the photo that cost him his job and reputation, to see what all of us here can make of it as we consider, as we have been all morning and now the afternoon, the relationships between power, sexuality, and masculinity, or as I would call it starting now, toxic masculinity. So when I looked back at this image of Franken, at the Franken image, it seemed very clear that he was not looking at me. That gleeful, sadomanic grin seems obviously meant for all the men who secretly felt like him. It's kind of a shabby trick, isn't it? Staged specifically for the bros that executes what we might call a hetero-masculine adolescent trope. And what is that trope? Hey, This girl is sleeping. Look what I can do to her. But of course, the joke's on him. Everything about this goofy, misogynistic moment reveals him to be just another guy who can't get the girl who thinks she's too good for him unless she's unconscious. And you may or may not remember, but the woman in question, Leanne Tweeden, actually reported to Ronan Farrow that Franken tried to orchestrate a big, wet tongue kiss earlier in their trip that they took where this happened, and she rudely rebuffed him. But what's, I think, important for us is that in Al Franken's account, staging that photo, which he obviously did, registered barely as an event in his workday and was at best sloppily filed in his long-term memory. But the very same incident defined Tweeden's experience of the workplace for all of her days. And I want you to think about this in relation to Brett Kavanaugh and Christine Blasey Ford, the same thing. It dominated and defined her life, and he barely remembered it, if at all. Now, when asked why she never reported Franken's misconduct, Tweeden's weary response was all too familiar. It was not worth the fight, since I wouldn't be believed. It was just going to be seen as my fault, and he was going to get off scot-free. Just an ordinary workday for him, the end of ordinary workdays for her. But that's partially why I'm going to suggest that well-worn defense of I just don't remember, or it was so long ago, again, think Brett Kavanaugh and Al Franken, can't be dismissed entirely as without merit. Because think of it this way. The bad boy, the Franken who is the bad boy, the one setting up his camera on the plane where this happened, is often defensively unlinked from the good boy, often a beloved icon, like Franken is. The beloved icon back on land. The bad one, still toting a backpack of resentment, can always be found tirelessly climbing the ladder of masculinity. And that's my first point. There is, in the culture of masculinity, a gender premise that goes, if I don't win, I lose. And if that's the metric with only two options, if I don't win, I lose, then you have to find a way to turn that dreaded risk of being a defeated bottom into the edgy high of being a top. And sexual misconduct and sexual harassment is one such strategy. Because what is going on in the minds of men who are predators of this form? What are they feeling? I cannot risk being rejected. You cannot laugh me off or worse, make me out to be ridiculous. You cannot say no to me. So let's now look at the image with this in mind. If you look at it, in my view, Franken's staging reads as just such a warning. Initially confusing, then startling, then shocking, then stingingly painful. A sickening betrayal by an apparently trusted colleague. But then, if you keep looking, as the image does its work, I think we can also see how juvenile it is, as if it were performed in someone's suburban basement, almost self-mocking, as if he were saying, yeah, I'm this desperate. I think that the scene also represents something that I would call the too muchness of Franken's excitement. But at the same time, as he is so excited that he does this, it also relies on the viewer's willingness to give him some kind of a pass. Why? I would suggest, because I think we are all primed to protect masculinity's confident veneer. Because although it struts cool and enviable, we all know that it is held together by matchsticks always at risk, easily wrecked, potentially retaliatory. The photo here is at the border of what I'm going to be talking about now, which is sexual harassment. You would put this right at the edge. And Franken was the first to fall, as we know. I now want to talk about sexual harassment and harassers, with whom I don't put Franken quite in that category. Because where Franken in this image was impulsive, sexual harassers are planners. And with that, I'd like to go back. I'd like to leave Al and go back to the other image. But perhaps he's just going to stay. Oh, no, here we go. All right. So sexual harassers are planners. Indeed, I consider them master manipulators. Their desires are not even necessarily sexual. They're not so much seeking sexual satisfaction, I would suggest, so much as they are craving the charge of erotic tension, the pulsing ambiguity of a potential boundary violation that hasn't yet occurred. And it's all the more intoxicating because of the open question whether and when the target can be coaxed to betray herself. Unlike rape, which is often, although not always, an impulsive act, sexual harassment is what I consider a project of leisurely objectification. You have to be at work. It's not a street crime. You have to be in charge of someone, and thus in possession of some relative measure of success. And you probably have to corrupt others to stay quiet or actually arrange the setup, thus further isolating your target by messaging her that absolutely no one cares. In sum, I argue that sexual harassment is a form of what I call erotic sadism. It's orchestrated and deliberate. Its dosage tweaked for maximum nervous pleasure, to create a permanent state of sexual tension, one of unwanted and interminable foreplay. That's why I'm calling it sadistic. So at this point, I'm going to just go a little deeper into what I mean by all of this and open to my other notes here. Just give me a moment. So what is going on in the actual enactment of sexual harassment? Well, I'm going to suggest that the harasser is probably taking pleasure in activating what I call the startle. That's that sudden, shape-shifting realization that this is not the next ordinary moment in his target's unremarkable business day, but the moment when she realizes that from now on, her days are not her own. What follows is a canyon of dread. There's the muddled uncertainty. Did he just? The shock of poisonous betrayal. I thought he thought the world of me. The stinging shame. I am just a body who happens to speak, not a speaking subject. As the workplace becomes unpredictably sexualized for her, getting flustered becomes commonplace. She's in now what we all would call a state of fight, flight, freeze. And in this whiplash of her shifting cognitions, is he, isn't he, and so forth, her harasser can enjoy the pleasure of having a plan whose outlines are unclear to her. What will happen? Will it happen this time? Will it happen every time? When will it happen? Which time? You can do anything if you are a celebrity, the Donald famously bragged. This is, of course, I mean, we all know that line, but I want to remind those of you who didn't know it, and I didn't know it till I found it, that notorious one-liner was actually echoed by Matthew Weiner, the creator of Mad Men, who allegedly told an assistant whom he had just promoted to write an episode of his show, "I deserve to see you naked." He later fired her. So I would say that the pleasure to be had in this extreme sport is that of what I call the perversion of consent. Unlike rape, where consent is vanquished, or erotic mutuality, where it's ratified, we both agree, the pleasure of sexual harassment is that consent is extracted, i.e., it's consent under duress. One version of that for the woman is that it's that same sad logic we have to live with, the logic of the least bad option, a form of reasoning that all girls learn to master when they first start making out. But for the harasser, the erotic requirements for him vibrate on a razor's edge. His object must still be a subject, meaning it's not like rape. He's not looking to have some thing lump moaning on the floor. He's looking for someone he might actually get to erotically moan against her will. Like the woman who described Harvey Weinstein's disgusting attempts at oral sex, which ruined it for all time, she later reported. But however things get played out in private, encounters like these are destined to be monumentally disqualified. Somehow the takeaway is nothing really happened. And that nothing really happened, sadly, was often, luckily this is more in the past, but as we know, never in the past, with one final sadistic threat. Yes, you have erotic power over me, but your power is worthless outside my orbit. You are a body. I am the big boss. Everyone shills for me. Oh, and if you refuse to play, I will do everything in my power to destroy you. A threat Les Moonves, for example, always carried out. So let me now go to what I think is going on for the woman. Well, let me start here. Part of the sadistic heat for the sexual harasser is that for him, the sexual charge, I've already said some things about it, but another one is, it hinges on the sadistic pleasure of watching you betray yourself as you're trying to protect your personhood, as he goes about dismantling it in a slow drip of degradation, and all the while maintaining a pretense of decency. What does that look like? I startle you, objectify you, then mindfuck you and glide back to business, disqualifying your reality testing as I go. In other words, the target, women who suffered this, have this experience, this is not happening. Is not. You cannot put words to it. You cannot clarify the situation. You cannot escape if you want to work in the industry. So if you think about that from our clinical world, the situation is a chilling example of what Gregory Bateson called a double bind. The target is told, I think the world of you, but soon enough is asked to twirl or smile or unbutton her blouse a bit, or talk to her boss while he parades in a loose bathrobe, etc., etc. Of course, I assume you know every one of those examples is right out of the media stories. We've got Matt Lauer, we've got Charlie Rose, we've got Les Moonves, we've got whoever, the other one, Harvey Weinstein. But the next part of that knot, and it is a relational knot, an R.D. Laing kind of knot, is that if the target comments on the paradox, You're doing this, but this, and what about that? She becomes the one bringing sex into the workplace. She is the one now creating a crisis. So let's think about it that way. Under these conditions, that grow up girl question, the one we heard, why didn't you just leave? Laugh him off, shake him off, go to HR. All of those presume a clarity of selfhood that may well have already been dismantled. Not in possession of all her faculties, perhaps not really in her right mind anymore. The issue for her is not one of leaving, not one of changing the situation, but one of reality testing. It does not help to remind such a victim to just say no when her question is, what just happened? And yes, we can all agree that sexual victimization ought not to be a badge, but it still is a fact. And yes, while it does look like this time, perhaps, time's up, sexual harassment, like any virus, is a social pathogen, always scanning for a point of entry. Let's stay sharp. Thank you.